Good afternoon, and welcome to Costat's Innovation Cafe series, a platform dedicated to exploring issues that affect us nationally, fostering dialogue around policy, strengthening capacity, and raising public awareness. My name is Melissa Headley, and I am a Senior Project Officer here at the College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago, or as my boss likes to call it, the best kept secret on the islands. We're very proud to be celebrating 25 years in higher education and do invite you to visit our website and follow us on our social media platforms to learn more about our institution and all the exciting initiatives that you too can be a part of here at the college. So, our topic for this month is ESG Unplugged, Innovation, Impact, and Industry Insight. And at this point, I would like to warmly welcome our esteemed panelists, starting with Mr. Nirad Tiwari, CEO of AmCham, Ms. Frances Bain Cumberbatch, Chief Legal and External Affairs at Answer McCall, Ms. Melanie Richards, Sustainability Consultant and Attorney at Law at Melanie J. Richards Consulting, and finally, Dr. Shari Byron, Econometrician, Faculty at Spelman College, ESG and Regulatory Alignment Expert. Welcome to all of you. Our moderator for today is Ms. Delamay Wilson, Dean of our School of Environment, Circular Economy and Sustainability, who will now kick off today's session. Delamay.
Thank you, Melissa. And before we dive into our conversation here today, I just want to take the opportunity to say how pleased I am to be able to moderate this discussion here, particularly with the wealth of experience and information that we're going to share today that we find from this panel, and the opportunity to explore ESG from different but intersecting angles. ESG, for those who are tuning in here, we're talking environmental, social, governance, the three pillars by which we measure and capture the sustainability and ethical impact of our companies. And so we're hoping for today for a real conversation. We're putting aside the corporate gloss and delving into what ESG looks like in a practical, purposeful way and rooted in our regional and local realities, right? So we know it's under a little bit of pressure, ESG, but it's evolving. And as it does that, we're going to have the conversations here to help guide us through the process. So let's begin. We're going to start by grounding the conversation that ESG is not so much just a buzzword or buzz terminology. It's strategic and it's imperative. But that shift that is taking place may not look the same everywhere. So we're going to jump in here, Nirad, with you first and get your take on this. From where you sit, what does this shift look like? And what are some of the biggest misconceptions that we encounter?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, my fellow panelists, to you, Dr. Wilson, and to COSTAT, thanks for having me on, and to everyone who's on listening, thanks for taking the time. It's a pleasure to be here. I could really just summarize everything I need to say by whatever the ladies are going to say, because they all are experts. I mean, I work with Frances, she's on my board. I've worked with Melanie. And I've seen Dr. Byron's profile, so I'm sure that they are going to be much more clear than I am. The biggest misconception from my perspective, though, is that ESG is some kind of a cost or a bother in some way. I think that when we start addressing that, and that's the opportunity and the shift as well, when we start addressing that, you start seeing the real win. So the difference between ESG and everything that it was called before, and I say it because it was CSR, it was just sustainability, it was giving back, whatever, community engagement, taking care of your fence line community, whatever you call it before, bringing the three elements together and with a focus on measuring the impact is the big shift. and is allowing the private sector as well as the stakeholders that are in the ecosystem, whether that be government, whether that be NGOs, whether that be community groups, employees, shareholders, customers, to be able to say, these are the things we are doing well. These are the things we're not doing at all. These are the things we're not doing well at, but we're trying to do. And so let's start addressing them. And then also we get to see the interconnectedness. So we see how governance metrics impact sustainability and the environment, and how sustainability initiatives are impacted by the environment and impact the environment, and so on. So we really see how it all comes together, I think.
Right. You didn't use the word, but what I heard was that ESG has been around, but accountability is where the shift is taking place. Public accountability. Is that correct?
I think we're getting. I think the tools to measure accountability are what is where the shift is taking place. There's always been public accountability in the sense that a community will know if a business is good in the community, or employees will know if it's a good place to work and if it's an ethical place to work, and the like. But because you have from IFRS standards to specific ESG standards to reporting in reporting in your annual reports and so on in a more targeted manner, and you have not just demands but the tools for this and the standards that you can use. It's a lot clearer.
Right. Okay. Measured accountability. Okay, great. Thanks for starting us off, Melanie. What are your thoughts here?
Sure. Of course, thank you for having me here. And I think, Nirad is really talking about what ESG provides us now with is a framework within which we can measure these things. And I think also importantly, consider the financial materiality to the business, which I think is a component that was missing in the other iterations of these three areas of ESG. I agree, yes, it is sort of coming into its own now and moving away from the numerous buzzwords that we've had, over the last maybe 10, 15 years. And I say this because I've seen a couple of things. I'm seeing more organizations really sort of paying attention to this now. I'm seeing more people getting engaged in whether it's training or their own personal development in ESG, kind of giving it a different level of credibility as an important subject area. With that as well, we have more, and this is just practical things that I'm seeing that demonstrate their importance. We also have more people providing sort of service providers in this kind of ESG space. Some of the misconceptions I think that I've seen is one, that ESG is just for big business, that, okay, it's only big corporate and perhaps listed companies that need to give consideration to ESG. The second thing, the misconception is that ESG, and this was more so in other iterations, it's a kind of an add-on or an ad hoc. So we do our business, and then we have this thing that we do at the side. That, I think, is one of the biggest misconceptions, because it is, in fact, an important strategic decision-making tool that has to be integrated into the way we do business. And then the third thing, which I think Nirad talked to, the other misconception is that, oh, it's just this big cost. And as we get into the discussion a little more, we can explore really the opportunities from ESG. So I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think you've added in quite a bit there. Shari and Francis, do you guys want to add or push back here on anything?
I can go ahead and add. First off, I just want to say I'm incredibly humbled to be here as part of this panel. and being able to give back in this way to just add and drive the conversation around awareness. My background is that I'm an economist, I'm an econometrician. I've been in academia, I've been in policy, I've been in second line risk as a risk professional at a global systemic import, a GSIB bank, right? I've been in model validation, so I understand the data side from this. In my last, stint, I was working on the compliance for the bank to be able to exist and continue to drive business in other territories, right? Other legal entities. And so I was able to see how these data, ESG data, and I'm going to reframe ESG, right, as data inputs are actually, fed into a framework that makes you think, oh, I didn't see this before. Here's an opportunity. Here's an impact, both positive and negative, right? But more importantly, here is a risk. And so I want to think of ESG not as the buzzwords or otherwise, but as a tool to be able to allow businesses to be able to understand risk. And when you understand this risk, you can then plan accordingly, right? That's one side of it. And then the other side of what, ESG has allowed us to do, it has allowed us to understand and in the Caribbean context as well, how vulnerable we are. Every single day we experience the impact of these vulnerabilities in the Caribbean. I mean, I came to Trinidad and it's hot and it's been hotter now, right? I see you all smiling, right? And that's not just a daily thing. This has been something where the patterns have changed and it impacts every single aspect of our lives. The flooding that we see, the kinds of irrigation that farmers have to engage in when they go out and they're doing planting in agriculture. And so using data to allow us to get insight that allow us to understand risk is another way of framing ESG. And I will talk a little bit more about that as we go along.
That's a powerful reframe there. A nice positive way of putting that. I like that. Francis, a few words from you.
Thank you very much for having me as well. And you always need to say that and mean it as well. It's a privilege to be here. In terms of ESG, there's definitely a shift. I mean, for us at Answer McCall, it has been a journey and continues to be a journey, because this is the other thing that, people think that this is a quick fix that you could, just kind of whip up a few statements and, put it out there. In fact, some people at some points would put in stickers on things and saying this is an ESG project, or whatever it is. There is nothing about this that is a quick fix. This has to be part of your business. It has to be integrated into your systems, your governance, your operations, your strategy, the way you look at things, the decisions you make around new equipment, a new acquisition. It factors into everything that you do. It is not a bolt-on. Narad, made that point, and Shari raised the issue of the whole thing being surrounding the question of risk, and risk not only from the standpoint of negative, but also the standpoint of positive, because in this world, you have to keep up. We are living in a very dynamic, fast-paced, innovative world. I mean, AI is just bubbling ahead of us. We can't keep up with it. And we therefore have to be, as businesses, always on the lookout for opportunities to grow and shift. And so being in tune with the sustainability, risks, and opportunities of your business is what is critical. And that is what the ESG, an ESG framework helps a business to do, by putting structure around that and making it an integral part of the machinery and how the business operates and thinks and how it is governed. And that is very important to know.
Yes.
Thank you. I think we got a very holistic picture there from each of you as we put the different vantage points together. Now, many of you mentioned about measurements and frameworks. If we cannot measure the ESG initiatives, we lose credibility. And if it is that at the same time, the companies feel overloaded or overwhelmed with all of the reporting requirements, particularly if there are capacity issues, we may also have some backfiring pushback happening there. So, Dr. Byron, we're pulling out your academic title here to address you. What role does data play in advancing ESG performance, especially in the Caribbean context? And then how do we achieve that balance with between reporting rigorously to build credibility and at the same time being realistic so as to not overwhelm companies?
Thank you for that question. So just to kind of start off, and I want to, emphasize something that Francis said. This is not something that's a quick fix, right? But the Caribbean, by its nature, and I will speak a little bit about that, we have that inbuilt in us, right? And we can tap into what is inbuilt in us, which is everybody is my family. There's songs that we sing about that, right? That we care about each other, that if I'm a business owner, I am actually, how did that business start off? It's a family business, or it might be two friends who started a business. And then what do? They look and say, I know somebody who knows this, right? So there are all these connections, which may happen in other spaces, but it happens more so. And those connections are like, I know your mother. I know your grandmother, so you can't do X, Y, Z. And I'm expecting a certain type of value system to come into play. And that is what we have in the Caribbean. And that is our comparative advantage, right? That is our comparative advantage that will allow us, because we're small, we can't change that. But being small, we are close-knit. And that's that comparative advantage that's going to allow us to be able to meet and exceed some of these, requirements or otherwise in terms of ESG performance. Stepping back on that, thinking about that, the kind of data, therefore, that we need to capture, right? These data, I mean, I've seen it in terms of the kinds of frameworks and the requirements that are needed. So if we are to work back, what does that mean? It means that every single company has to start collecting data. And these data are not necessarily data that you don't already collect. You might be doing it qualitatively, but now we need very rigorous and qualitative as well as quantitative data. And those, we just call those terms metrics. So it's just data that we're then going to massage into metrics that then we then report, right? Why is this important? Because no business makes any kind of decision without some kind of data, right? And so as businesses grow, we need to be able to capture more data. We need to capture these data in accurate ways. We need to capture data in ways that are also auditable, right? Because then these data are being used to make decisions. And so the data that we capture needs to conform to specific types to be able to allow us to make decisions and also meet our requirements. And I'll stop there for now and I'll let other panelists add in and then I can add in as well.
Okay, that's a great start there. Francis, what's your thought from your vantage point? Because you
Well,
guys are living it,
I have
right?
a lot to say on this.
Yeah,
A lot to say on this point. And just building on what Sharia said, because we are in the middle of basically doing exactly what Shari is talking about. And Melanie is one of the key players in that exercise because she's helping to support us as well. But there was a quote that one of my attorneys who's very passionate in this area, she sent to me just recently, and she saw it somewhere and she said, I love this quote. And she said, the quote goes something like, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Put very simply, a company cannot afford to just have an opinion, right? You have shareholders and wider stakeholders, wider public. When you make a statement about what you're doing, you put out information, it needs to be grounded in accurate and complete data and information, right? And so we don't have the luxury as a company to just have an opinion, okay? So the data that you're gathering from an ESG standpoint has to have the same integrity as your financial statements. It has to be treated with the same level of care and diligence. And so when Shari spoke about in an auditable format, that is crucial. So for example, with us, and again, Melanie could attest to this, what we did when we started, so we've reached a point where very soon you'll be seeing our first ESG report coming out in maybe about the next week or so, where we have started to align our reporting and so on in line with IFRS S1 and the underlying standards, related standards, GRI, etc. And you have to basically ensure that that is stress tested. So first port of call, the internal audit team needs to come in and say, hey, what's going on here? How you all collected this data?
Right.
Let me see. You said you're using X amount of energy. I want to see your light bill. How much water you're using. I want to see your water bills. If it's not matching, sorry, these kinds of things. So before you get to the point of actually releasing disclosures, you have to have data. And you have to make sure that that data has been stress tested internally through your governance systems. In our case, it would be internal and external audit, right? As well as management, first of all, as the first line, and then your audit team and so forth. But you have to be able to have that level of rigor in order to ensure that you meet the expectations of your wider stakeholder audience, and that you maintain credibility. Otherwise, you run the risk, a huge reputational risk, which will defeat the whole purpose of the exercise in any event. So that is critical. Having said that, though, I will say this, because there was another part of your question around overwhelming, because that sounds very burdensome and huge and so forth, right? And one of the things that we learned, even as a large company, because we are doing something that many companies have not begun, even large companies as yet in this region. And we took a very phased approach. So we didn't try to, I should say, I was very ambitious at the start of it. And I had to, when I realized what was going on, I was like, okay, guys, we need to slow down here, because we taking on a lot, right? And based on what the task is, the resources available, the time, the people, we will fail. So the advice would be is that you take things on a phased basis. Don't try to do everything all at once. Set short-term, medium-term, long-term metrics and targets. I mean, and you'll get to the stage later on. You can't set targets without data, because you need to know where you're starting from to know where you're going and what you need to set, right? And then, collecting data at the start of it as well, it also helps you to benchmark against peers. So, from a Caribbean standpoint, always we have the onus of being able to say, well, look, we're just as good as you, But in order to say we're just as good as you need to have the data to support and say we're just as good as you. Now, we know we're just as good as them. But the point about it is we have to have the data to support our assertions, correct? So
Correct.
I'll leave that right there.
And let me just, if I might just add to Francis's point about that, right? So that's part of where the frameworks come in, because the frameworks are standardized frameworks. And so if we're all building data to this standard, then it allows for the data to be compared across pairs, across industries. And that is the beauty of the pain that Francis and Melanie have gone through in terms of putting all the different pieces from all the different lines of businesses and all the subsidiaries into this format matrix. But the beauty of that too is that it allows you, once you start doing it the first time, right? Now you have a framework. And then the second time becomes a little bit easier. The third time becomes a little bit easier, not to mention all the learnings that are happening while you are doing all of these iterations that benefit the business in terms of opening up new opportunities, opportunities that you thought of, to Francis's point, like, you talk about it, but you're not seeing it on paper and you don't have a cost benefit against it. And so now it's opening up opportunities that you're like, oh, line of business, this really tags to you. Why don't you all go and explore this as a potential source of revenue or otherwise, downstream revenue or otherwise? Oh, look, we have these efficiencies that we can gain from making synergies across this business and this business. And so that's what this framework, allows for companies, small, medium, as well as the big ones, to benefit from.
Right. You guys mentioned framework both times, and I'm really happy that Francis said phased, because I heard you speaking about having the auditing team and whatnot, and I was thinking, well, what about a smaller company? And both of you have touched on that. I want to pull in Melanie and Nirad by adding another question into the mix here, but extending from the frameworks. We have this pressure that we need to align within the existing ESG disclosure frameworks that tend to be of international origin. How do we ensure that the Caribbean ESG strategies are globally informed within these frameworks, but still locally relevant? So adding on to the discussion there, how do we advise, like what advice would we give to the companies that are trying to fit into these frameworks, but dealing with a local context? And Melanie, we'll start with you and then go to Nirad.
Yeah, sure. So I think we need to separate the strategy from the framework. And there are a number of things like, and forgive me, I wrote some notes in advance because I have a tendency to talk a lot, and we are to time, right?
Right.
I think if we look at things like the ISSB and the CSRD, which are international reporting frameworks and directives, when we're looking at this within a Caribbean context, and Shari had spoken to this, these international frameworks provide global comparability. As it relates to the Trinidad and Tobago context, so the ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, falls within the IFRS Foundation, and I know it's a lot of acronyms, the IFRS Foundation governance structure, so the International Financial Reporting Standards. Previously, we had the IASB, the International Accounting Standards Board, and then now we have the ISSB. Now, within Trinidad and Tobago, the IASB, the International Accounting Standards Board, has been issuing IFRS's, International Financial Reporting Standards, for decades. And within the preparation of the financial statements and the audited financial statements, it is definitely within Trinidad and Tobago, we align with these IFRSs. What the ISSB brings now is similarly the start of International Financial Reporting Standards, sustainability standards. So you have IFRS S1 and S2. So within the reporting and the disclosure, I think that we are on the track, given that IFRS is what we use on the accounting side in Trinidad and Tobago and in wider Caribbean jurisdictions. We are definitely on the track, I think, to adopting this. And certainly, I think if we weren't on that track, Ansa and Francis and her team wouldn't have been sort of, moving in that direction. But as it relates to contextualizing this within the Caribbean context or within the local context, what the IFRSs allow you to do is you're really identifying your material topics. So yes, we want global comparability, But within the application of the standard, you are identifying what are your material topics. And within those material topics, you are identifying what are your sustainability risks and opportunities, your SRNOs. So what it allows us to do, or any jurisdiction to do, is to adopt an international standard. But within the application of the standard, what is material in our context allows us then to adapt to the contextual realities of Trinidad and Tobago or the jurisdiction. So we will then identify what are the material SRNOs, sustainability risks and opportunities, for me and my business within the context within which I operate. Now, that might be different for another company in another country. They will identify different material topics and they will be capturing different data and reporting on different metrics. But it allows then this sort of flexibility where we all have that global comparability that Shari spoke to, while at the same time identifying what is material within our Caribbean context. So then when we develop our strategies and we're integrating this ESG into our business systems, we are really looking at what is material to me as an organization operating in the Caribbean region or in any other jurisdiction. And I think what we've seen very recently within the last 2 weeks is the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange has become a member of the United Nations Sustainability Stock Exchange Initiative. I think that is an important signal that we are then, because we understand the importance of financial markets in addressing climate risk. So it is an important signal that we are moving towards having our markets address ESG concerns and looking down the line in terms of identifying metrics in line with global standards. So I'll leave it there for now, and I'll hear from Nirad or anyone else that wants to chime in.
Right. So, Nirad, why don't you add in here before I comment?
Well, that was a setup if ever I heard one, right? So after Melanie explains all of this with such clarity, she says, "Oh well, we'll hear from Nirad for anything he wants to add." So all I will say then is ditto. But I knew this moment will come, right? I knew this moment will come. So I went and I found something that I knew I could introduce when there was nothing else to say because it's been said before, that I think is useful. The Economist put out a story yesterday citing a PwC report, a survey of approximately 4,000 firms. And what it found is that only 16%, and I say only because, we've seen some ESG pushback in the last few months. At least that's a narrative that we're seeing in the news. Only 16% dialed back their ESG goals. 47% stood by their initial goals, but 37% became more ambitious. And I think that is very, very interesting context for what we're talking about here. Because sometimes, and I want to use it to make another point, sometimes we might feel that the macro environment is changing and that our work on ESG related topics, far less ESG as an amalgamation of things, is not going to be worth it for the business or for the people, when in fact the opposite is happening. Now, what the article also said, and something I disagree with a little bit, is that a lot of firms are doing this quietly. Now, I have a suspicion about why, and I think that a lot of firms are doing it quietly because of the fear of being labeled greenwashers are not having the data yet to support their what might seem like public claims of being an ESG champion or sub champion. But I do think that we need to make sure we are communicating our wins. And as Melanie said, materiality matters. And I think that's a point that is often missed. We don't, Francis said it too, right? That materiality matters, but it's a journey. So what the metrics, what the frameworks, what the scorecards, whatever you want to call it, the standards, allow us to do is see where we are. And we can't change where we are. So if we've been very bad at ESG metrics, that's just where we are. But if we've been okay, then we can celebrate that being okay, but say, we want to be better than okay, at least in these subcategories, because they are material. And then link that to other things that are out there. And I mean, Condoleezza Rice would have spoken a lot about this in her book, Political Risk. But where is the risk to the business that might come from non-core operating activities, that might come from seemingly left field, but are actually linked to operating activities that might be overlooked in the course of your normal business, conducting your normal business. I'm not sure if I said that well, but what matters to the business as we measure those things and where we are, do we discover that we may have risks that we hadn't started taking into account yet? And then let's start one, acknowledging them. So if we say, look, we've been bad at X or we're bad at water usage, but we want to get better, then it's going to be very hard for somebody or some group to say, we're going to go after company Y because of their water usage. You've already acknowledged it and showed people how you're going to address it and acknowledge that we need to do better. We need to do more. It's not just about profit. It's about our impact in this in this space. So
Yeah, may I
Right.
add something to that, to what
Yeah.
Narad said there? So he talked about the risks, but I'm also saying that, and if there's one thing I want to leave, there's a framework. The framework can be adapted to all the different nuances, to all sectors, right? And to Narad's point, it's identifying risks, but it's also identifying impacts and opportunities that the business may or may not have known. And that will there might be wins. My point is, there might be wins, there might be positive impacts, there might be positive opportunities that the business didn't think about because they hadn't really set it out in this very, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. It's a massive framework that only certain pieces, so it's a massive framework, but only certain pieces may apply, right? Now you have that map every single year. You can go back to this massive framework, and as the business evolves, you can assess it against what you did last year in terms of what you want to do in the future, right? And we said this before, in a short term, medium term, long term time frame, given the changing environments that may be happening at the political, economic, and social environments that might be happening at this time, right? I want to also just say something about, these frameworks and the data that come in and the ESG. I think of ESG as people, planet, people, and power. E for environment, we're talking about the planet, right? Our impact as a business, your use of resources, and the impact you're having on the resources that are available. People, well, we also want to understand the socioeconomic impact of our businesses, in both directions, right? Power, we think about the governance. What is that binds us together and holds us together, that we are accountable and transparent to each other within this? And that's my point that I was making, that in the Caribbean, any one of these countries, right, is a rock. And there's nowhere else for us to go but on this rock. So we have to make sure that the rock is sustainable, not just for the current generations, but for future generations. And so that's that intrinsic, caring that we have, that it is our comparative advantage.
Right. You mentioned the what did you say? Massive framework. Francis, give us some words of hope here. Does it get easier as you start? As you
Oh,
go
boy,
along?
boy, boy.
That says, there's only one answer to that, right?
I was wondering if it was a trick question. I don't know. I mean, I just want to say, put me on the spot here. Look, it has gotten easier. I would say it has gotten easier. This is not a journey that is for the faint of heart. You have to be committed. There's a level of commitment to getting this done. And as I said, I reinforce the fact you do it bit by bit based on your capacity, based on your resources, based on what is available to you. And then you phase that, based on what is material to you as well. So it does get easier if you take a strategic approach to getting it done. It is not going to get done overnight. And frankly, once you get into a space of understanding your limitations based on your resources and so forth, then it does get easier because your mindset is different. Your mindset is different because you're taking off one, or you're eating one piece of the cake at a time. You're not trying to swallow the whole cake. So for personal experience from, Ansel McCall's experience, it has gotten easier with time because we've realigned and understood and still understanding, we're understanding what is material to us and where we need to focus. And so we continue to trim the fat as we go along in terms of the initiatives that we get into in terms of immediate versus medium term versus long term. So there is hope. To really just answer that question, there is hope. It is not an insurmountable task. Yes, it's a huge framework or whatever it is, but don't let that stop you. It's not just for big companies. The average small company can do this by basically narrowing down what is material to them. And the same principle of, because Shari spoke about the risk, not just the negative, when we hear risk, we always think the negative, what could threaten the business, but the opportunities that could really come to the business if we're paying attention, right? And that ties into your strategy and your strategic planning and so forth. And those big words of strategic planning, it's not just for big corporates. Everybody, even down to an individual, you have a strategy for your personal career, your personal goals, what you want to achieve, whether it is to lose weight, to do whatever it is. You have a strategy, you have a plan. So this is something, the basic principles apply to the ordinary man on the street,
Yes.
the smallest company there is, whether you're a greengrocer selling something on the street versus a big corporate like an Ansel McCall. It's just the principles that apply across the board,
Right.
And
So-
they're so basic. So for instance, even, as Francis said, talked about the individual person on the street, right? If a guy realizes, let's say a vendor, and he realizes, wait a minute, you know what, my business, I'm dumping water, along this river or along this road, and it's causing flooding or whatnot. And then he's able to somehow figure out a way to divert that, or he has extra food at the end of the day, right? What is he going to do with this waste? Not dispose of it, but give it to other people. Can you imagine then if he goes back and says, well, at the end of the day, when I had this extra food, I give it to this home. People will come. People will be like, oh, really? I want to shop with you. I want to buy from you. And that is the kind of positive opportunity, positive externality, the kind of positive opportunity impact that, we can have. He might not have thought about it, right? But there it is laid out for him. And that's the knitting that we have in the Caribbean that is unique to us.
Right. Nice. So let me ask, Francis, I'm picking on you before
I find you picking on me.
before we circle back, right? Your company has been experiencing this on a local level, right? All that we've just discussed and going through the learning curve. Tell us a little bit about the key governance shifts behind that progress, the progress that you guys have made, and how you manage reputational risks in this disclosure era. So Nirad kind of touched on it when he talked about the potential for people to want to hide some of the information they find, like the green hushing or the greenwashing that might come out of the situation. So I'm asking a two-part question for you to start off on here. How, what are some of the key shifts that had to take place in your governance structure to implement these things? And then how are you guys dealing with that cultural pressure of the reporting and the risk that might come from that?
Right. Well, let me start from the beginning. Look, you're not going to get an organization such as ours or any company that is actually, participating in business on a serious way. You have inherent or ought to have inherent governance structures in place. So it's a question. If you don't, well, then you're starting from scratch, and then it's not just about ESG, it's about just corporate governance, period. So if you have proper governance, corporate governance structures in place and policies and so forth, it's a question of adding, supplementing to that, finding the most appropriate levels, persons, bodies, entities within your governance structure to actually carry out the oversight and execution of the ESG program that you're looking to implement. So of course, in anything when you're talking about oversight, your board plays an integral part in it. I mean, we could not have gotten as far as we did without the support of our full board, our parent board, and of course, our chief executive officer, who has been, driving this and supportive of it from the very beginning. So I would say from the standpoint of including and making sure that at the highest level, the discussions happen there, the updates are brought there, the monitoring is taking place there, the holding to account is taking place there at that highest level. And so there's a rhythm of reporting and updating. So management doesn't get to not speak about what progress is being made, and they don't get to not be stress tested on why they're not doing certain things or why certain things have not happened as yet, stress test the opportunities that could be put in place, and so on. So I would say it is merely in our case, it was an introduction and ensuring that one, at the start, at the highest level, that reporting and monitoring mechanism, proper oversight is there at all levels. So whether it is at the board level, what we have what we call advisory councils as well. So we're now ensuring that happens there. So at a sector level, there's oversight at that highest level as well. Then within management's operations and so on, there's that kind of governance where the leaders have to ensure that the plans and the metrics that are being defined and so forth, and the rhythm. So when corporate comes in, so when our sustainability specialist, Natalie, I believe she's on, I'm not sure, but when Natalie comes in together with a Melanie, who's now basically part of our team, there is a certain level of reception. They get headaches all the time, right? Because look, they're coming in, other people have other things to do, but they know that this is not a choice, right?
Mhm.
So they may give them a little bit of stress, but they have to fall in line, right? But then I would say, to be fair to our teams, many of them are very much into this because they've actually seen, we've moved along the journey, they've actually seen the benefit for them and what it can do for them. And in some cases, they've actually found, because of the data collection exercise that we've been doing, they've realized that perhaps some of the ways in which they've been collecting data could actually be improved, right? And so the exercise is throwing up things that is now improving our operations, right? So So making sure that there is that integration at all levels of the organization in terms of leadership, making sure that this thing is going widely and down through the organization is very important. Tying it into our balanced scorecards. So we have strategic balance scorecards, and making sure that our ESG initiatives are tied in there was also very important. Putting it as part of executives' KPIs and compensation requirements as well, because it's part of our compensation, executive compensation. I get compensated on delivering per our ESG plan. If I don't deliver, I'm losing money. Right? So there's incentive to get it done. So those kinds of things had to be introduced into our governance system to set the tone, to get the buy-in, to get that drive and that willingness to stay the course, basically. In
Right.
terms of reputational risk, and Narad made a great point there. Look, everything that we've been talking about around data is critical to that. If you have wrong data, inaccurate data, or you're not giving fulsome information, you run the risk of serious reputational damage. So all of this stuff all of the equity you are looking to gain, you run the risk if you do not have proper data in place. You run the risk of really ruining your reputation, which ultimately goes to the bottom line. Reputation is tied to your bottom line. If you have a bad reputation, people don't want to buy your products. The right people don't want to work for you, so you're not going to have the right teams, strong teams to drive the agenda that you want to have. You're not going to be attractive to many people. So there is a dollar value to ensuring that you have the right data, that you are presenting fulsome information, being as transparent realistically as you can, and ensuring that your reputation is not in a compromise or can be compromised in any way.
Yeah. If I might
Thank you
just
for that.
add, if I might just add to Francis, and just to continue on that, right? It's just we as women in this area, we just flow in with each other, right? Is to say that you talk about the reputational risk, talk also about, and then she talks about the impact that it would have on the earnings per share, right? We are investor driven. All of these companies are for-profit companies. And so at the end of the day, firms or other businesses or households who have bought stocks and bonds are looking for that EPS, and that EPS better not be flat. I'm telling you, all right? And so that also drives the investor demand, right? So imagine you're a company and you have all these benefits. And by the way, the investor population is also shifting. It's trending down. It's the Gen Zers and the millennials who are investing. And not only are they investing, they are also the largest consumer block. And unlike us who are loyalty driven, these young'uns are also value driven, and they actually really care about the environment, right?
Yeah.
So here it is now, you're able to find ways to position yourself, to differentiate yourself as a feasible, resilient, sustainable type of investment to be made, right? That's number one. Number two, banks, because why a bank? I was at a bank. Why are banks doing this? For the love? No. The regulators have to Francis answered, right? No, because she knows that arm of a bank, right? Regulators are requiring it because they realize, listen, if capital has to flow to different places, right? There needs to be a carrot and a stick. So they gave the carrot and now they're giving the stick. If you're not in compliance, there are penalties to be paid. And so banks, firms, right? Because banks finance firms have to then be able to provide these data so that then they can provide it to the regulator as part of their compliance requirements, right? And then the third thing is, as we talked about, and especially in the Caribbean here, we are export driven. We have tourism, we have agriculture. A lot of our seafood goes to the European market, right? Once you have that form of trade, you're dealing with a firm that's in Europe, in the EU. EU has these requirements on their firms. And so if you want to continue doing business in those markets, you have to, in a sense, comply. So it is coming if it's not here already for some firms. Yeah.
And I want to, if I could add something as well, I want to just emphasize from a company standpoint. Remember, ESG is the framework, it's a reporting framework, right? But the underlying principle is about sustainability of the business and how it remains sustainable while reducing the impact on the environment and people. Okay? Now, if a business wants to be sustainable and is moving, it's about how you operate. So when you talk about sustainability, it is tied to the business remaining and or growing into a stronger and resilient business with time for the benefit of not just its shareholders, but all stakeholders. So when you talk about sustainability integrated into your business decisions and your strategy and so forth. So for example, we bought bought and installed a brand new returnable bottling line. Now, Carib Glassworks and Carib Brewery have been in a closed loop recycling model for over 60 plus years. Okay, it's not new to us. So ESG and as I say, the framework is the formalized version of it, reporting on it, but the actual execution of sustainability in business has been done by the Antimacal Group, for example, in our Carib Brewery business for ages. And so we decided to double down on a sustainability model. Yes, it has reduced impact on the environment because the equipment, which costs $200 million US, the equipment uses less water, less energy. There's less waste created based on the way the machinery works. So all of that is positive to the environment, but here's what, it's also good for business. So let's start there. It's good for business and it's good for the environment and it's good for people, etc., etc. So it's about sustainability of the business in a responsible way, right? That's what this is about. And the ESG framework is really a method of reporting on that, where you create a level of transparency for the benefit of your shareholders, your investors, the general public, the young people, the experienced professionals, people you may want to attract to your business. And again, that goes to the sustainability of your business. So I want to make that point. This is not just about kumbaya and we all love each other and so forth, right? Because at the end of the day, if business is not successful, people are not successful. The economy does not work and everyone suffers. We saw that with COVID when business shut down. You had people who did not have jobs, people lost jobs, they lost income and so forth. So business is not the enemy. Business actually is the engine of the economy that provides the lifeblood for basically our existence. And what we're saying with sustainability is just do it responsibly. Do it responsibly. And ESG is a method of basically saying, we are giving you the data that we are assuring you, just as we do with our financial results, we are assuring you that we have done this. We have made money, yes, which is important, but we have made money responsibly. And where we have not done as well as we should have, we are saying that, and here's how we are going to improve. These are the timelines. This is the investment it's going to require. Here's how long. Here's the impact on the bottom line. That's all this is about. Very simply. Very, very simply.
Right.
And just to kind of add to that, it's almost like, for a long time, our function has been about profits, has been about dollar economic profits. We're simply adding another variable to that. We're saying the economic profits, but also the profits to the society, the profits to the people, and optimizing across all of those constraints.
I have so many more questions for you guys, but we're running out of time, and I see we have three in the chat, so I'm going to jump there. I think Francis started to answer one. There's a question from Ms. Singh. What exciting local innovations are tackling our ESG issues here in TNT, and how can we make them widespread? So, I think you gave an example, Francis, of how you guys were working with the brewery. Any other examples that you guys want to mention or highlight here?
I don't want to call things by company name, right? But I do think that there is a lot happening. There are a lot of people, a lot of organizations who are identifying that doing this type of uh, environmentally and responsible business, as Francis said, is a value to business. So there's a lot happening. I don't want to call out names. Francis has the luxury of referring to Ansa McCall. But I think there's a lot happening out there, and I think more and more people are making that shift from having these things as a kind of add-on and these sort of ad hoc, let me just do this initiative, to integrating this into their core business and understanding, as has been said so many times before, this is about risk and about opportunity. And just as any other organization should be identifying what your risks are, whether it's your business risk, your regulatory risk. ESG is another type of risk that you have to identify. You have to find mitigation measures, and then you have to try to reduce what the residual risk is. Similarly, again, as has been said before, and organizations are starting to do that on the opportunities side. I mean, and Shari spoke to it. There are significant opportunities that Gen Z, and to lesser extent millennials, who are absolutely the most socially and environmentally conscious generation. There are billions of resources that generation, I don't know where they get it from, but they have the money to spend, and they're spending it in responsible ways. They are not saying, well, okay, my mother used this brand for 15 years, I'm sticking with this brand. If this brand is not doing what I deem to be socially and environmentally responsible, well, I'm going to the brand that does. Similarly, on the employment side, I'm not working with this organization because, my family worked with them for 40 years. I am looking for the organization who's minded towards socially and environmentally responsible things. And one last point, Francis talked about sustainability of business. Business cannot operate if we don't have a planet, if we don't have that rock that Shari spoke about. So we can't separate how we operate and are sustainable as a business from the environment within which we operate, because we can't exist unless we have that rock. So we need to have, as part of the way we do business, incorporating care for that rock and care for those people and resources who are integral to the way we operate. Sorry, I went all the way off the question.
But I appreciate the statement.
But I will leave it there and also have that as my closing comments. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, we still have two more questions from the audience, and I'll see if we could get through them quickly. What is the strategic, this is from Mr. Raghunanan, what is the strategic importance of educational initiatives within the ESG pillars? And what is the current landscape of entry-level job opportunities for recent graduates and school leavers? Who wants to tackle higher ed or education?
I mean, I can. I think there are different levels of education, of course, right? So there's a formal education through traditional post-secondary institutions such as COSTAT or UE or any other university, and then there's the stuff that we do a lot of at AmJam, which is education with members around everything ranging from materiality to how you measure and what others are doing and so on and so forth. In terms of school leavers, I think I mean there are jobs. So all of the accounting firms, for example, are now going to have to measure this if it's part of as you incorporate the IFRS standards. And I mean, I know quite a few young people who are working in EY and PwC. I know that many companies are hiring as well as they seek to bolster their implementation. So, I mean, there will be jobs. Is it going to be a field like data science where the jobs are going to outstrip the available jobs are going to outstrip the supply? I mean, I don't know, but there are opportunities for those who are good, who are driven, and who can communicate well. And similarly, for the third question, I mean, at the risk of offending anyone on this call or otherwise, I think Scotiabank is an excellent example, and intentionally, from the board all the way to its HR policies, really tries to be inclusive with regards to gender, as well as people who are differently able in their HR framework and in their hiring and selection policies. So there are companies and many other companies are trying to expand, especially as they go through their metrics as they go forward. And what I would say is there are many examples of companies in Trinidad and Tobago that are doing more, whether it be what ANSA is doing. And I thought Francis was going to talk about their challenge, their natural capital challenge that allows NGOs to pitch for solutions to enhance natural capital that they then fund a pilot for. So ANSA is doing that, for example. Francis, sorry if I overstep, but I'm proud of what you all are doing,
And in fact, what I like is that advocacy. I am not advocating. I need to be doing a good job. So I love that, Nirad. You advocating for us. Thank you very much. That is,
Right.
that is advocacy in action.
Guardian Group is doing quite a bit. Proman just tokenized their whole supply chain so that when you can, to Shari's point about when you are trading, when you are conducting business in Europe, you can show what the environmental impact of your product is as it arrives at the border. And that's all on blockchain now. So they have a token that allows you to see what the methanol that you are buying, how that has impacted the environment. So there's a lot going on. Massey's loan with IDB Invest has an ESG component. They would not have gotten that financing if they did not meet some ESG, and if they don't continue to meet some ESG metrics around how they localize their supply chain in the for lack of a better term, in the supermarkets that they run in particular. So, there's a lot happening, and they're very tangible examples of that now. And I encourage people to get involved. We have an ESG event looking at social impact in September. ANSA is a sponsor and participant of that as well. And that speaks to the education. We'll have more in November in our ESG conference. We just had one, I think it was in May. Focused a little more on the environment. The HADCO Group's investment in ecotourism and linking that back to communities and industries. I think there's some journalists that are coming down to do some stuff with them next week, for example. So there's a lot happening in the space. It's no longer talk, it's no longer wishful thinking. There's a lot of action, and I think as companies do more and more of their reports and make them public, people are going to be surprised by how much has already gotten done and how much is being done.
I just wanna
Appreciate that.
ride on Nirad there, and just to return your favor to AmCham, of where I sit as a director as well. They play a very important part. They have taken on ESG as one of a flagship point of education in terms of their agenda and strategy to add value to their membership and so on. But I wanna touch on education at a different level, which is at the broad school education, young people. And this is where, we actually are partaking in what is a pilot program for sustainability, teaching sustainability in schools, in secondary schools. And where personally we should be encouraging this to be going is very early on, you want to capture young minds in that way of thinking, because it was that lack of thinking that got us to this point of climate issues and so
of
forth
thinking.
in the first
Yeah,
place.
yeah.
You want to make sure that you cultivate that with education in our school system very early, whether it is, and I'm not just talking secondary schools, from very little, you can teach sustainability to kindergarten kids. Just make it in a way that it makes sense to them at that level, right? But straight through our education system. And that would be fantastic if we could cultivate education and educated generation from early o'clock about sustainability and the importance and the responsibility that we as individuals have, and as that companies have, but starting with the person around the sustainability of our country, our region, and our world. And the more that we can contribute to that as corporate citizens, it would be fantastic to work with governments to achieve that. And we've started doing that with the Harcon initiative and the sustainability pilot programs in 2 secondary schools in Trinidad and Tobago.
And I just want
Okay.
to tag on to that, if I might just add a couple comments. I mean, I do believe that our culture allows us to do that. We've got, storytelling, and Nancy taking on climate, something like that, right? And that is
Yes.
getting to that generation that you spoke to there, Francis. Then I remember growing up on the backside of the condensed milk tin. Do y'all remember that? With the butterflies, right? That's how I became aware of the importance of the range of butterflies, because biodiversity is so important to our countries, to our rocks, right? That allow us to be able to provide for ourselves or otherwise. Storytelling, that's part of our culture as well. We do it in our music, we do it in the soca, we do it just even in how we connect to each other, right? And so leaning into these things is the type of power that we have as a Caribbean.
Thank you, guys. We are out of time. We had a few more. This is an exciting conversation. We had a few more questions in the chat about job opportunities, internships, and I see Melanie dropped her email in the chat. Should anybody have some follow-up questions, they can reach out to her. So we appreciate that. Any final words here as we wrap up from our panelists? Sherry.
Sorry, go ahead, Sherry, after you.
I'm just gonna keep my eyes open, and I'm gonna put my email in the chat. How does that sound?
Sounds great
Okay,
too. Sounds great.
I just want to very, very quickly make one comment, because I think I need to just bring in a little bit of the law as well. So last week we had from the International Court of Justice
Oh, yes.
a landmark advisory opinion on the obligation of states as it relates to climate change. For those of you who are interested, it's a couple hundred pages long, but go and look at it. What I think I mean, there were so many things in that advisory opinion, and it's an advisory opinion, so it is not legally binding, but it carries significant moral and legal authority. One of the things in that advisory opinion, when the court looked at the risk of significant harm, it noted that states must assess the cumulative effect on the environment, including climate change, of activities that are both the state and the activities of private actors. As it relates to nationally determined contributions, those are now, the requirements there are much more stringent. So where do I see this going? I mean, we haven't seen this play out yet. The judgment was just last week on the 25th. But what this means is that states, in identifying and managing the risk of harm, they need to consider what private actors are doing. It means then that this potentially will go in the direction of more regulation, more legislation over private actors as it relates to GHG emissions, because of this obligation of states that also includes not only their own activities, but those of private actors. So I just want to kind of bring that in the mix, because it's really interesting in terms of where we're going with this opinion. It was a huge win for the climate movement. And maybe we have another conversation on that another time.
And part
Let me
two.
just add, if I might just add, I'm going to take some panelists, liberties here. Just
Go for it.
piggyback on Melanie. If those data do not exist, they get estimated. And I'll leave it at that. So it is better to be more accurate. And so that's why, if that is not incentive enough to help small businesses build the muscle to be able to be collecting these data, if it's not available, it will be estimated.
So take control of the narrative.
To
Yeah.
take
All right.
control of the narrative, we need to take control of the narrative, and we have the power and the people to do that.
Thank you, Shari, for that. And Melanie, any last words, Narad and Francis?
Yeah, just really quickly. I mean, I want to end where I started. ESG is not new. It's a new term. It's a new framework. But business was always supposed to be, in an ideal world, operating in tandem with the community, right? What happened as business changed and became global and bigger and so on. And in more recent times, Shari referenced shareholders, and you have activist shareholders who are only concerned about the short-term movement of the share price. There was pressure to move away from some of the longer-term things that would impact business sustainability, as well as therefore long-term profitability. And I really think that, in my experience, I've been head of a chamber for more than 15 years now, in my last job and this one. Businesses in Trinidad and Tobago want to do good, right? They want to be good at what they do, and they want to make profits, but they want to do good. And it's an intrinsic ethos that we must have, that ESG frameworks can help us with, but cannot instill in us. Because even with the frameworks, if you don't want to do good, your overall impact won't be good. It would just be less bad. So I think that we have to always remember that we are part of a community and a network, and we have to, as business leaders, as chamber leaders, always make the point that we are in this together, and be mindful that when we say things like a rising tide lifts all boats, it really makes no difference if my boat is still leaky and in danger of sinking. If I am doing that at 1,000 feet above sea level or at sea level, right? And so we have to find ways to use this new framing of the conversation and energy around it to continue to have more and more positive social impact, because it is only through socio-economic impact at the macro level and advancement that we will have long-term sustainability in the market at the micro level, at the firm level. And I genuinely believe that the majority, the vast majority, I'm not talking about 51%, talking in my opinion, upwards of 80, 90% of business leaders see themselves as playing that kind of role. And this gives us more tools to be able to demonstrate that in a tangible way.
Thank you. Francis, take us home.
I thought Narad did that, you know, I don't need to say anything more. I mean, and look, just to say that ESG is not just about reporting. It's reporting, yes, but it is about transparency. It's about what Narad spoke about in terms of that desire to do good and to show and demonstrate in a very transparent and honest way that, look, we are doing good. We are trying our best to improve where we're not doing as well as we are. And we're prepared to share that with you. And we want you on that journey because we are all connected. This is about sustainability, not just of the business, but of our environment and our people, whether working within the organization or the wider community. So it is something that is deeper than just profits, just reporting. It's about the essence of who and what we really are, right? Taking away all of the fancy language. It's about us as people, and how long we are going to survive from generation to generation, and the quality of life that we are all going to have, our children and our children's children. And in accordance with our purpose, it's about inspiring better choices for a better world. That's our purpose at Answer McCall. It's very simple. Simple, not complicated.
Right. I think we hit on the dollars and cents and also on the ethical commitment and impact there. You landed us on a very good note. Thank you so much, panelists, for being so candid and the depth that came with responding to the questions. We got some very genuine responses there. So I want to thank you so much for participating in the conversation today. I see emails have been shared. I know that people want to continue the conversation, and Melanie, we might have to take up your idea for a part 2. I'll turn this back over to our hosts at this point.
Thank you. I want to adapt what Frances mentioned. I think she said her colleague mentioned, without data, it is just an opinion. So thank you so much, Delamy, for orchestrating this conversation. And to our panelists, Nirad, Melanie, Francis, and Shari, we really appreciate that you all made the time today to contribute to this important topic. Your inputs socially, most certainly, were invaluable. To our listening audience, those of you who are new, those of you who are regulars, we value your participation and input, and do thank you also for joining us here today. Innovation Cafe is held every last Wednesday of the month, so we do invite you to join us again for the next episode, which will be on August 27th. So almost always, these discussions circle back to the importance of education to effect change. And so please allow me to close by mentioning that the college is currently admitting new students for the start of classes on September 8th. So if you or someone in your social circle is looking to start a new career, upskill themselves, or if your business is looking for corporate training options, our team is ready and waiting to have a conversation with you. Finally, on behalf of the president, management, and staff here at COSTAT, I wish you all a good day and a productive rest of the week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank God for ESG, you included me as a male in this panel. Bye, everyone.
I love it. Oh my gosh.
You were a good tag along. How about that?
Yes,
I'll
yes.
take
It was
that.
good,
No
guys.
problem.
My fellow panelists, you all were great. I loved
Yeah,
it.
high five,
This
high
was
five. I
fun.
love it.
Thank
I'll
you.
take
Awesome. Thank you. I will keep in touch.
All
Yes.
right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.